Florida State has lost 7 straight. Clemson is the only team in the ACC that has beaten Florida State 7 consecutive regular season conference games in a row. And they are narrow favorites in the game. They are playing with, college football playoff implications through and through. Clemson, a win here would reposition all of the goals and sort of all the expectations. A loss, you've got 2 conference losses by the end of September. I mean, you might be out of the ACC championship race at that point. Where does this matchup hinge, Bud?
Well, I think a lot of it will come down to Clemson's receivers. Cole Turner's out. Debo declined to use the transfer portal. And look, I don't think their receivers scared FAU. I thought Duke disrespected Clemson in the way they played those receivers. They squatted on them. He said, "Can you run by us?" I don't think so. We'll throw it short. We'll tackle it quick, right? And that's kind of what I think you'll likely see from the Noles. Clemson this year cannot hit big plays so far, and it's very small sample. I mean, 3 games is not that. Their big play rate, 125th in the nation. They're do I think they look better than last year? I do. Yeah, I think the offensive line is better. Klubnik looks a little more comfortable. They seem to be settling into Riley's scheme, and obviously Florida State did not do a very good job defensively last week. Can they mess with the safeties enough of Florida State? Can they find ways to scheme guys open? I don't know that Clemson's receivers are good enough to dominate one-on-one. If they are, then Clemson's going to win the football game. If they aren't, then I think it could be a tough day for the Tigers.
They got a lot of short fields against FAU.
They did.
That scoreboard looks really good, but when I was going back to review it, the defense, the turnovers, and FAU's own self-inflicted wounds really set Clemson up with a lot of really good opportunities. There were not a lot of times in that game where Cade Klubnik was challenged and delivered on the challenge of marching 75, 80 yards down the field for a touchdown. And doing that, as you know, is going to require at least a few explosive plays. One of my takeaways from that game was that the scoreboard did not quite match up with how much the offense, really proved to me in that spot. So I'm curious to see what happens against Florida State's defense for sure.
Trivia?
Yeah, let's do it.
Yes.
Keon Coleman had 9 catches for 122 yards, 3 tutties against LSU. How many catches has he had since that game? He said 9 in that game. How many catches since then?
9.
3 or 4.
3.
None last week.
0 versus BC. This has got to be a game where you kind of break out the full arsenal that we saw against LSU. And you got to give credit to the other teams, right? I mean, they're doing, and Johnny Wilson has stepped up because he's, I'm sure a lot of coaches last couple of weeks watched the game against LSU. They throw in the tape and they're like, all right, where are we going to put our best guys? Where are we going to shade coverage to? Who are we going to give help over the top? So it's provided a bunch of opportunity for Johnny Wilson. I think this has got to be a, Keon Coleman steps up big. Did Jaheim Bell get banged up, Bud? Have you heard anything update on him?
He did get banged up. I think he's probably going to play.
Okay.
With the Coleman thing, Coleman did not have a very good game blocking last week. On the fumble 6, they actually have a pretty nice slip screen drawn up that likely scores or goes for a very long gain. And instead of blocking, Coleman ran a route. And the guy who hit him as soon as the back turns around is the guy that Keon was supposed to block. But I do think that they were really trying. First of all, we know they worked wet ball stuff in practice all week because they thought it was going to be a hurricane. I don't think they had much of a defined game plan for a non-hurricane game, which ended up being not quite so bad. I think Jordan's trying to get the ball to some of these other guys who need touches, right?
Oh, just like building the confidence in the offense.
A lot of guys got draft stock thoughts going on, right?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of guys have
probably coming from Mike Norvell too. Hey, we
rebuild Johnny Wilson's confidence.
Absolutely. Get everybody involved, keep everybody happy. I mean, that's very common to see that take place. On the flip side, the defense, I think, versus Boston College, they got kind of a little bit lost in zone sometimes. I think you got to go and say, all right, we're going to man up on the outside. I mean, nobody's been able to get open for Clemson. You mentioned the wide receiver issues. This, brought in Fentrell Cypress, one of the best DBs out there. I think this is a game where you don't try to get cute with zones and mixing coverage. You play more man and say, good luck. Let's go. And trust to get some pressure up front on Cade Klubnik. And I thought the one thing that like you got to be careful of, and this is where you say, all right, they gave up a lot of kind of, scramble plays to Castellanos, who clearly is more athletic and a better thrower on the run than Cade Klubnik from what we've seen him so far. Like if he beats you with his legs because you're man and you're running, you have your back turned to him, then you just got to say, all right, that's a big one. And then you adjust if that does happen. Because you saw that happen somewhat in Duke. Remember, he started running the ball a little bit, had some success there. But I think you got to challenge these wide receivers.
I don't think it's a special defense. I mean, we said this all offseason, right? Like I was on 24/7 Carl yesterday. He's like, I think Florida State's the best team in the country. I'm like, I don't, right? I see a bunch of guys in the back end of this defense who like will probably play in the NFL, but they're not going to be like high-end draft picks. Some of them will probably go sell insurance, right? Like they're not special back there. They just have to be assignment sound, and the offense has to cook. This is an offensive football team. They need to run Jordan in this game. They have a bye week after, and then they have 3 or 4 games in which they're going to be, more than a 3-score favorite, most likely.
How about
I know Jordan got banged. It's the non-throwing shoulder, and he came right back in the game. Like to me, it's suck it up, shoot it up. You have to run because the run game has actually been really poor the last 2 weeks. I know they put 66 on Southern Miss, but Florida State was sloppy in that game. They did not run the football effectively in that one. Like if you're scoreboard watching, you'd miss it, but they got forced to 3rd and 4th down a lot because they did not really have great offensive line cohesion. And I think in some of these games, teams they're not respecting Jordan keeping it because I think they realize Florida State's correctly, FSU's trying to keep Jordan healthy, right? In the most important games, that has to be a part of the offense. This is not an offensive line that has a bunch of NFL guys on it. It will not push Clemson around. Clemson's really good on the defensive line still. You have to even up the numbers in the run game with the quarterback run. If he plays, he better be running because he's not such a special thrower that he can just sit back there and not run. To me.
Going back to your thoughts on the defense, to back that up, Florida State's defense ranks 105th nationally in explosive play rate allowed.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's like the sample size is the sample size, but even USM in a game in which Florida State blew them out, they allowed like 11% explosive plays on the defensive side of the ball. The Eagles were able to get big plays. They just couldn't hit any of the smaller plays.
Is that garbage time adjusted? I mean, like clearly Boston College hit a lot.
Mm-hmm.
LSU hit that first play of the game. Remember, first or second play of the game? That was like a 70-yard gain, whatever it was, down to the red zone.
Yeah. And the 80-yarder was
is
against the freshman.
This kind of similar to what I was saying about Tommy Reese in Alabama. I do think this has to be a Garrett Riley calls a gem. I think you've, like to Tom's point, you've seen them susceptible to big plays. Well, Garrett Riley, we brought you in there to find them.
Let me throw this name out there as an X factor. True freshman wide receiver Tyler Brown. It's just like a classic Clemson story. Greenville, South Carolina guy. A little bit short, 5'11", not going to get all the same offers that he would be if he was about 4 inches taller and a little bit heavier. But he had 2 touchdowns in the FAU game. He had one of the only explosive plays in that game, and he was running back punts. I mentioned the short field. He had a huge punt return that set up another short field for a touchdown. As the depth of that wide receiver room is being tested, it felt like that was a freshman sort of getting a little bit of confidence. That is a player who, if Clemson wins this football game, I think Tyler Brown has been a big part of it. He could be a big part of really helping save this Clemson passing attack.
I also think that perception-wise, most of the country saw Clemson play Duke because it was like the primetime solo game that day. And Clemson shot itself in the foot a billion times and made that game a lot more difficult on itself than it probably should have been, and they lost because they deserved to lose. And then I think people saw them struggling early against Charleston Southern. I don't think anybody's really paid any attention to Clemson the last 6 quarters because they've looked like Clemson. And I think that is very much impacting the way that this line is and what people think this game's going to be like. I think this is going to be a much better game and a much more difficult test than for Florida State than most people are assuming. And I don't care about last week against BC because to me, that was very clearly a look ahead. We're not worried about this game. We're just thinking about Clemson kind of game, which we see from teams all the time.
I mean, there were some concerning factors. They were also up 31-10 with 11 minutes left, right? Like but there's definitely some stuff that concerns me there, right? Hey, like they need Jordan to play better.
they need to learn how to do that, right? I mean, I don't say
Which they did. They would have
State-
lost that game, in the last 10 years, they would have lost it. Every year they would have lost it. They
Yeah.
found a way to win.
yeah, it's part of the process of getting to where they want to be. I think Mike Norvell calls it the climb.